We're going to go ahead and start Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a very important chapter. It contains a lot of skills dealing with exponents and roots and simplifying them. This is not a chapter you want to slack off in. Let's go ahead and review some exponent stuff from your previous course. Now, remember that something like a to the fourth means an a multiplied together 4 times. So 5 to the third would be 5 multiplied together 3 times, which in this case, since we're dealing with numbers, we could work that out and we'd get 125. So what does a negative 1/3 all cubed mean? Well, it means a negative 1/3 times a negative 1/3 times a negative 1/3. The exponent tells you how many times to multiply your number together. So to multiply fractions, you multiply the top, you get a negative 1. Multiply the bottom, 3 times 3 is 9, times another 3 is 27. Well, a negative 1/3 to the fourth power then would have to be a negative 1/3 multiplied together 4 times. Then once again, you'd just go ahead and you'd multiply the top together. 4 negatives multiplied together is a positive. And notice that that should be a positive here. Sorry about that. And so then we get positive 1 over 81. So let's see if these are equal. If we look at what each one of these means, the one on the right, since it's a negative 1/3 in parentheses all squared, means a negative 3 times a negative 3, which you know would be a positive 9. The one on the left, the exponent only applies to the 3. It does not apply to the negative. So it's really a 3 times a 3 with a negative in front, and that's what we have here. Well, when you multiply that together, you get a negative 9. So two totally different meanings here. So if you want your calculator to do this, make sure you use the parentheses. If you type it in like this, it'll give you the wrong answer. So these are not equal. So when you look over here, is the first one here is what we're trying to figure out. The question is it this right here, or is it this right here? Well, the difference is, to work this one out, they multiplied the 2 and the 3 together, and then they're going to go ahead and do the exponents. Over here, we did the exponent first, and then we're going to do the multiplication. So you need to remember your order of multiplication. Do you multiply first or do exponents first? And the correct answer is you do exponents first. So the first one is the correct answer. Here we have a to the 0. A to the 0 is 1. Pretty much anything to the 0 is 1. The only exception is if you have a 0 to the 0. That's undefined. If you ever end up taking calculus, that's referred to as an indeterminate form, and then you can actually go ahead and work out that at some point. A negative exponent, as a review, means you need to put that part in the other part of your fraction, or it means the reciprocal. So on this one here, we have it over 1. In other words, to make that a positive exponent, you just basically flip the fraction upside down. So as we look at this one here, this is over 1, so we got to flip this upside down, so be a 1 on the top, and I have a mistake again. So this one ends up being 1 over that, which is a 1 over 25. So here we have a negative exponent, but it's on the bottom. Basically, you got to flip it upside down. So in other words, it's going to put the 8 to the 3 on top, put the 1 on the bottom, and of course you don't have to have it over 1 then. Let's go ahead and review our rules of exponents. As we look at this one here, we have a 5 squared. You know 5 squared is 5 times a 5. And then you're multiplying it by a 5 cubed. So you got to multiply that times another 5 times a 5 times a 5. Well, here you have 5 multiplied together 5 times, so you end up getting a 5 to the 5th power because it shows up 5 times. So what did we do with our two exponents to get this exponent? We added them, and that's what we're saying over here. Here we have an exponent raised to an exponent. Well, you're cubing this, so that means whatever is being cubed has to show up 3 times. So you're going to have your 2 to the 4th, another 2 to the 4th, and then your third 2 to the 4th. Well, based on what we were just doing up here, it says we have to add these exponents. Well, when you add that together, you get 2 to the 12th. Okay, so what are you doing to your 4 and your 3 when it's an exponent raised to an exponent? Well, you have to multiply those to get your 12. And that's what this right here is saying. So what happens when we're dividing? Well, here we have a 2 to the 5th. Well, you know that's 2 multiplied together 5 times over a 2 squared, so you have a 2 times a 2 on the bottom. Well, you should remember that a 2 over a 2 is 1, so they cross out and drop out. A 2 over a 2 is 1, so they're there and they drop out. So all you're left with is really just this. So you're left with a 2 times a 2 times a 2, or a 2 cubed. So what did you really do with your exponents here to get this exponent? Well, in this case, you subtracted. So when you're dividing, you subtract your exponents. Here we have two things multiplied together, all cubed. Well, if it's all cubed, you know you're going to have a 2x times a 2x times a 2x. Well, it's all multiplication in our parentheses, and it's multiplication between our parentheses. You should remember that you can multiply in any order you want. So you could put the 2's together, put the x's together. Well, another way to write your 2 cubed is, or 2 times 2 times 2 is 2 cubed, and x times x and x is x cubed. So in other words, when it's multiplication on the inside, you can apply that exponent to each one. And that's what we were doing here. And that's what this rule over here says. Note that that does not work when you're dealing with addition or subtraction on the inside. It only works if it's multiplication or division on the inside. Here we have negative exponents again. I had said before that negative exponents mean you have to take the reciprocal. So you're basically going to have to take this fraction and flip it upside down. So your 3 to the second goes on top, your 2 to the fifth goes in the bottom. So if you have negative exponents in the top and the bottom, you basically flip it upside down, and then your exponents become positive. Here, we have a negative exponent on a whole fraction. Well, once again, I said that negative exponent says take the reciprocal, so you're going to flip the whole fraction upside down, which in this case I did, just a second. And so then you have your fraction flipped upside down. So if a whole fraction is negative, you flip it upside down and the exponent becomes positive. So let's go ahead and apply some of these rules of exponents. Here we need to go ahead and simplify. Once again, simplify means you want to eliminate all the parentheses and combine stuff together. Inside our parentheses here, in each case, we have all multiplication. In between our parentheses, we have multiplication. So, in other words, we don't really need the parentheses. I did keep the parentheses around the -5, so it looks like we're multiplying by a -5 and not dealing with the subtracting of a 5. Since you can multiply in any order you want, let's put the numbers together. Let's put our A's together. Let's put our B's together. So I just kind of rewrote the order. Well, now our -2 times our -5 is a +10. A to a power times a to a power, once again you got to add your exponent. There is no exponent like there is in the second a, that means it's a 1. So your 1 and your 3 is your 4. Same idea here. 1 on the b you add to your exponent over here. And so then you get a b to the 5th. Over here we have an x to the power divided by x to the power. Basically you want to go ahead and subtract. And so you end up getting an x to the -8, which is really then, to make that a positive, the reciprocal, and we get this. And that's what we have right here. Now, another way you can look at that is which one has more x's, the top or the bottom. Well, in this case, the bottom has 8 more, so you have an x to the 8th on the bottom.